My wife took everything in the divorce, but she signed away her future. Why was she so confident that taking everything meant she had won? What did she unknowingly give up when she signed the final papers? Hello, everyone, and welcome to Six Store, where betrayal, hidden consequences, and unexpected reversals change lives forever. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story. Thank you for every view, comment, and moment you spend with us. Your continued support helps our community grow and allows us to share more unforgettable stories. Tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there right now. We truly appreciate having you here. Now, settle in, listen carefully, and let us step into the opening moments of today's gripping story. The strangest thing about losing everything is realizing that sometimes the person who thinks they won is the one who lost the most. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom as my wife, Claire Parker, picked up the final divorce papers with a smile I hadn't seen in years. A confident smile. A victorious smile. The kind of smile people wear when they believe the battle is over and the prize is already in their hands. She looked across the room at me, waiting for anger, waiting for desperation, waiting for me to finally break. But I didn't. I just sat there quietly, my hands folded on the table, listening as the judge confirmed what everyone in that room thought they already knew. Claire would receive the house, the investment accounts, a significant portion of the assets accumulated during our marriage, the things we built together. Or at least, that was what everyone believed. Her attorney leaned closer and whispered something in her ear. Claire nodded slowly, almost proudly. She had won. That was the story everyone would tell. The story her friends would celebrate over expensive dinners. The story she would repeat whenever someone asked how the divorce ended. My husband lost everything. But there was one thing Claire didn't know. One thing nobody in that courtroom understood. She had just signed the document. That would change her future forever. My name is Ethan Parker. I'm 45 years old, born and raised in Texas. For most of my life, I was never the loudest person in the room. I wasn't the man who walked into a restaurant wearing a designer suit, hoping people noticed. I wasn't the guy who needed everyone to know how much money he had. I was the opposite. Simple clothes, quiet mornings, long days. I spent 20 years building a construction company from nothing but an old pickup truck, a borrowed toolbox, and a promise I made to myself after my father passed away. Show up, do the work, keep your word. That was the foundation everything was built on. And for a long time, I thought my marriage with Claire was built the same way. When we met, she wasn't interested in money. At least, that's what I believed. She liked the fact that I worked with my hands. She liked that I could fix things. She used to laugh when I came home covered in dust and paint, saying I looked like someone who belonged on a job site instead of a magazine cover. Back then, we didn't have much. Our first apartment had old carpet, noisy pipes, and a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people. But we were happy. We celebrated small victories. Our first couch. Our first vacation. The day I hired my first employee, Claire stood beside me when my company was nothing more than an idea written on a piece of paper. She told me she believed in me, and I believed her. But somewhere along the way, something changed. The woman who once asked, "How was your day?" started asking, "How much is this worth?" The conversations became less about dreams and more about numbers. Less about us, more about what belonged to whom. I noticed it slowly. The way she looked at our home differently. The way she talked about my company like it was an asset instead of something I had sacrificed my life to build. At first, I ignored it. Because when you love someone, you explain away the cracks. You tell yourself everyone goes through difficult seasons. You convince yourself things will return to the way they were. But seasons end. And sometimes, what you think is a storm passing by is actually the foundation beginning to collapse. By the time Claire filed for divorce, she wasn't the woman I married anymore. She came into negotiations prepared, documents organized, lawyers ready, a strategy already written. She thought I would fight. She thought I would panic. She thought she understood the entire game. And maybe that was my mistake. I let her believe that. Because sometimes the most powerful move you can make is not showing your opponent the move you already made. Claire walked out of that courtroom believing she had taken everything from me. She didn't realize she had only taken what I allowed her to see. And the truth she was about to discover would cost her far more than money. The day you realize someone never wanted you to win, they only wanted you to lose quietly. That's when you stop fighting the battle they created. I used to think losing was the worst thing that could happen to a man. I was wrong. The worst thing is watching someone you spent half your life loving celebrate your loss like it was their greatest achievement. For 20 years, Claire Parker and I built a life together. Not a perfect life. Not the kind you see in magazines. A real one. A life made of early mornings, unpaid bills, long workdays, and small victories that nobody else noticed. I still remember the first office I rented for my company. It wasn't impressive. A small room above an old hardware store with a broken air conditioner and a window that barely closed. During summer, the heat was unbearable. During winter, the walls felt like they were made of ice. But I loved that place, because everything inside those four walls represented something I had earned. Every contract, every employee, every late night, every sacrifice. I didn't inherit a business. I didn't have someone hand me a shortcut. I built it one decision at a time. And Claire was there during those years. She saw me come home exhausted. She saw me fall asleep at the kitchen table with blueprints still in my hands. She saw the stress I carried when payroll was due and a client delayed payment. Back then, she didn't care about numbers. She cared about me. At least, that was what I believed. But success changes people. Sometimes it changes the person who achieves it. Other times, it changes the person standing beside them. The first signs were small. So small that I ignored them. A different tone when she talked about my company. A different look when she walked through our house. A different way she described our life. She stopped saying, "We built this." She started saying, "You were able to build this because I supported you." There was truth in that. Marriage is a partnership. I never denied her sacrifices. Claire moved with me when I had nothing. She stood beside me when I was chasing something uncertain. But somewhere along the way, support became ownership in her mind. And love slowly became a calculation. I noticed it one night during dinner. We were sitting across from each other at the same table where we used to plan our future. She looked around the house and said something I still remember. "You know, Ethan, if we ever separated, I wouldn't walk away with nothing." She said it casually, almost like she was talking about the weather. I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She had started looking at our marriage like a business agreement. Assets, accounts, properties, numbers on a page. Not memories, not promises, not the years we spent together. Just value. And I think that was the moment something inside me changed. Not because I stopped loving her, but because I finally understood something painful. You can build a home with someone who is already planning how to divide it. Months later, when Claire finally told me she wanted a divorce, she didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. She sat across from me in our living room, holding a folder in her hands, and spoke with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed every word. I think we both know what happens next. Her voice was calm, almost professional, like she was ending a business partnership instead of a 20-year marriage. I looked at the folder. I looked at her, and I realized she had already moved on emotionally long before she moved out physically. She had prepared for war. She had lawyers. She had financial records. She had a plan. What she didn't have was the full picture. Because while Claire was studying, everything she believed she could take from me, I was remembering everything she had forgotten. The agreements, the signatures, the decisions made years before, the things she never thought mattered, the things she signed without reading twice. At the time, I didn't say anything. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I didn't tell her she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Some truths are too valuable to reveal too early, so I let her believe what she wanted to believe. I let her think I was defeated. I let her walk into that courtroom convinced she had already won. Because sometimes the person who celebrates too soon is the person who never noticed the game wasn't over. The most dangerous moment in a marriage isn't when two people start fighting. It's when one person stops fighting because they already know the truth. Looking back, I can see the exact moment Claire stopped seeing me as her husband and started seeing me as an obstacle. It wasn't during the divorce. It wasn't when the lawyers got involved. It happened much earlier. It happened quietly. The kind of change that doesn't announce itself. It just slowly replaces everything you thought you knew. After my company started growing, our lives changed. We moved into a larger house outside Austin. We stopped worrying about whether the mortgage payment would clear. We could finally take vacations without checking every number in our bank account. From the outside, it looked like we had made it. Neighbors saw the nice house. They saw the successful business owner. They saw Claire wearing expensive clothes and attending events with executives and investors. They saw the picture. but they didn't see what was happening inside the frame. Because success has a strange way of revealing what people truly value. When we had nothing, Claire loved the journey. When we had something, she started focusing on the destination. I remember one evening sitting in my home office. The room was quiet except for the sound of rain hitting the windows. I was reviewing contracts for a major project that could change my company forever. Claire walked in holding a glass of wine. She looked around the room. Not at me. At the things around me. The awards. The framed contracts. The photos of construction sites. You know, she said, sometimes I wonder if people understand how much I gave up for all of this. I looked up from my desk. What do you mean? She smiled. Not an angry smile. Something colder. Something calculated. I mean, while you were building your company, I was the one keeping this family together. There was some truth in her words. Marriage is never one person's achievement. I knew that. I appreciated everything she had done. But something about the way she said it felt different. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't pride. It sounded like an invoice. Like she had been keeping a record of every sacrifice, waiting for the day she could collect. After that night, I started noticing things I had ignored before. Claire became more interested in my company finances. She asked questions she never used to ask. Not about my day. Not about my stress. Not about the people who worked for me. Only numbers. How much is the company worth now? How much equity do you own? What happens if you ever sell? At first, I thought she was simply trying to understand my world. I wanted to believe that. Because admitting the alternative meant admitting something much more painful. That the person beside me might be looking at me like an investment. Then came the dinner with her friends. I still remember that night because of how normal it seemed at first. A beautiful restaurant. Soft lighting. Expensive wine. Everyone laughing. Claire was telling stories about our life together. But somehow, every story ended with the same message. She was the reason I succeeded. She was the person who sacrificed. She was the person who deserved recognition. One of her friends raised a glass and joked, "Claire, you basically built that empire with him." Everyone laughed. I smiled politely. But Claire didn't correct them. She just accepted it. That was the moment something became clear. She didn't just want to be loved. She wanted ownership of the story. And in her version of the story, I was no longer the man who built something. I was the man who owed her. The divorce conversation happened 3 months later. By then, Claire had already created a new reality in her mind. She believed she was the one who had carried the marriage. She believed she deserved everything. And because she believed that so strongly, she never questioned whether she was walking into a trap. During our final meeting before court, she looked at me and said, "I hope you understand, Ethan. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm just taking what's fair." Fair. That word stayed with me. Because fairness depends on what someone knows. And Claire didn't know everything. She didn't know about the decisions I made years earlier. She didn't know about the documents I signed before success changed our lives. She didn't know that while she was preparing to divide my future, I had already protected it. The strange thing about secrets is that they are not powerful because they are hidden. They are powerful because of the moment they are revealed. And Claire had no idea that the moment was coming. A person can spend years building something valuable and still lose it in a single afternoon if they don't understand the rules of the game. The week before our divorce hearing, Claire was already living like the future belonged to her. She had stopped talking about our marriage. She only talked about what came next. Her new apartment. Her new lifestyle. Her plans after the divorce. It was strange watching someone prepare for the end of a 20-year relationship with the confidence of someone preparing for a business acquisition. There were no tears. No second thoughts. No moments where she looked back and questioned whether we were throwing away something worth saving. To Claire, the marriage was already finished. The only thing left was dividing what remained. And she believed she knew exactly what she was going to get. Every meeting with her attorney made her more confident. Every document she reviewed made her believe the outcome was guaranteed. Her lawyer, Victoria Hayes, had built an entire strategy around one idea. Claire was the person who stood beside Ethan Parker while he became successful. Therefore, she deserved a significant reward. From the outside, it made sense. A successful businessman. A long marriage. A wealthy lifestyle. Most people would assume the person walking away from a divorce like that would receive a large settlement. And Claire wanted more than a settlement. She wanted victory. She wanted everyone to know that she had not walked away empty-handed. A few days before court, she sent me a message. Just one sentence. "I hope you're ready to be reasonable." I stared at that message for a long time. Not because I was angry, because I realized something. Claire genuinely believed I was the unreasonable one. She believed that protecting what I had built was selfish. She believed that questioning her demands meant I didn't appreciate everything she had done. But there was something she didn't understand. There is a difference between refusing to give someone what they deserve and refusing to give someone what they never had the right to claim. The morning of the hearing, I arrived early. The courthouse hallway was quiet. People walked past carrying folders, legal documents, and expressions filled with uncertainty. Divorce has a strange atmosphere. Two people enter the same building with years of memories behind them. Then they walk out with signatures on paper deciding what those years are worth. I sat on the bench outside the courtroom while reviewing the final documents with my attorney, Daniel Brooks. Daniel was not the type of lawyer who needed to impress people. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make dramatic speeches. He believed preparation was more powerful than performance. That was why I trusted him. He looked at me and asked one final question. Are you sure you want to let this proceed? I knew exactly what he meant. There were still opportunities to challenge certain things. There were still ways to make the process more complicated. But I shook my head. No, Daniel studied my expression. You understand what everyone in that room is going to think. I nodded. Yes. They're going to think you lost. I looked down at the documents in my hands. Then I smiled slightly. Let them. Because Daniel knew something Claire didn't. The biggest mistake people make is assuming silence means weakness. Sometimes silence means someone has already calculated every possible outcome. When we entered the courtroom, Claire walked in with confidence. Her attorney carried a thick folder. Claire wore the same expression she had worn during our last conversation. Calm, certain, victorious. She looked at me like she was looking at someone who had already surrendered. The hearing began. Numbers were discussed. Assets were reviewed. Requests were presented. And one by one, Claire's expectations became reality. The house, the accounts, the property, the things she believed represented her reward. I watched her reaction carefully. Every time something was approved, her confidence grew. She whispered to Victoria. She smiled. She nodded. She was already celebrating. The judge eventually looked toward both sides. Are there any objections before we finalize these agreements? The room became quiet. Everyone looked at me, waiting for a fight, waiting for anger, waiting for the moment I would finally reveal how much I didn't want to lose. But I simply said, no objections. Claire looked surprised for a second. Then she smiled. She thought my silence was confirmation that she had won. She thought she had taken everything. But she didn't notice Daniel placing one final document on the table. A document Claire had signed years earlier. A document she had completely forgotten about. And that single piece of paper was about to change the meaning of everything that had just happened. The biggest mistakes people make are often hidden inside the moments they feel most confident. Because when someone believes they have already won, they stop looking for what they might have missed. Claire had no idea that the final document sitting on the courtroom table had been there long before the divorce ever began. Years before lawyers. Years before arguments. Years before we sat across from each other as strangers. To her, it was just another piece of paperwork. Another signature. Another agreement she believed worked in her favor. But I remembered the day she signed it. I remembered the conversation. I remembered the reason it existed in the first place. Because long before my company became successful, I learned something from watching other business owners lose everything they built. They didn't fail because they weren't talented. They failed because they mixed emotions with ownership. They believed love and business would always stay separate. They believed trust meant preparation was unnecessary. I used to think the same way, until I watched friends lose companies during divorces, until I saw partnerships collapse, until I realized that protecting something didn't mean you expected the worst from people. It meant respecting the value of what you built. That was why, years before anyone knew my name, I worked with Daniel Brooks. Not because I didn't trust Claire, because I understood responsibility. When my company started growing, Daniel helped me create a structure around everything I had built. The company, the assets, the future projects, the things that represented years of sacrifice. At the time, Claire knew about it. She was involved. She sat beside me during some of those meetings. She listened while Daniel explained documents filled with legal language most people would ignore. And that was where everything changed. Because Claire wasn't careless. She wasn't unaware. She simply believed those documents were unnecessary. She believed there was no reason to think about a future where we weren't together. At least, that was what she said. I remember sitting in Daniel's office on a cold morning. Claire was across from us, flipping through papers. She looked frustrated. "This feels like overcomplicating things," she said. Daniel calmly explained. "These agreements are not about expecting failure. They are about making sure everyone understands what belongs where." Claire looked at me. "You really think we need this?" That question stayed with me. Because at that moment, there were two possible answers. I could say no. I could say love was enough. I could say we would never become one of those couples who needed protection from each other. Or I could be honest. I could admit that life changes. People change. Circumstances change. And protecting the future doesn't mean you stop believing in the present. So I signed. And Claire signed. Not because we expected divorce. Because we were building something valuable. The irony was that years later, the same document she barely paid attention to became the thing standing between her and the future she imagined. But Claire never remembered that day. Because to her, the important moments were the ones where money was being made. The celebrations. The expensive dinners. The vacations. The lifestyle. She remembered the success. She forgot the foundation. That was the difference between us. I remembered every brick. She only remembered the finished house. Back in the courtroom, Daniel placed the document on the table. Claire looked at it without recognition. Her attorney leaned forward. "What is this?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He simply opened the folder. Then he pointed to the signature at the bottom of the page. Claire's signature. The same signature she had written years earlier. The same signature she believed meant nothing. The judge adjusted his glasses and began reading. The courtroom became quieter with every sentence. Claire's expression slowly changed. The confidence disappeared. The smile faded. For the first time that morning, she wasn't looking at me like someone who had lost. She was looking at me like someone who had just realized she never understood the game. Because the truth was simple. Claire didn't lose because I fought harder. She lost because she never bothered to understand what she was fighting for. And the document in front of her was about to prove that the victory she celebrated was never what she thought it was. The most powerful moments in life are not when someone loses everything. They are when someone finally understands that what they thought they owned was never truly theirs. The courtroom was silent. Not the uncomfortable silence that happens when people run out of things to say. A different kind of silence. The kind that appears when everyone in the room realizes something important is happening. Claire stared at the document in front of her. For the first time that morning, she wasn't smiling. She wasn't confident. She wasn't looking at me like I was a defeated man sitting across from his former wife. She was reading. Really reading. And with every line her eyes moved across, I watched the certainty disappear from her face. Her attorney, Victoria Hayes, leaned closer. "What exactly is this agreement?" Daniel Brooks remained calm. "This is the ownership and asset protection agreement signed by both parties several years ago." Victoria looked through the pages quickly. She was searching for a weakness, a mistake, something she could use. But there was nothing. Because this wasn't something created during the divorce. It wasn't a last-minute strategy. It wasn't a trick. It was a document Claire had agreed to long before we ever imagined sitting in that courtroom. The judge continued reviewing the pages. Then he looked up. "Mrs. Parker, are you familiar with this agreement?" Claire hesitated. Just for a second. But everyone noticed. "Yes," she finally answered. Her voice was quieter than before. "You signed this document?" "Yes." "You had legal representation present?" "Yes." "You understood the terms?" Claire looked toward her attorney. That was the first moment I saw fear replace confidence. Because confidence comes from believing you know the outcome. Fear comes from realizing you never understood the situation at all. "Yes," she said again. But this time, it sounded different. Like she was trying to convince herself. Daniel opened another section of the document. This agreement clearly defines the separation between personal assets, business ownership, and future company interests. Claire's attorney immediately interrupted. "Your Honor, we believe this document requires further examination." The judge looked at her. "Counsel, this agreement has already been provided during discovery." Victoria paused. Because she knew. She knew this wasn't something hidden. This wasn't something Ethan kept secret. The information was there. The opportunity to understand it was there. They simply didn't pay attention. And that was the part that hurt Claire the most. Not because she was losing, but because she realized she had been given every chance to understand. She just assumed she already knew everything. For years, Claire believed I was the man who needed her. She believed my success existed because she allowed it. She believed the divorce would be the moment she finally received what she deserved. But she never considered one possibility. What if the man she underestimated had been preparing long before she decided to leave? The judge continued reading. The room remained still. I looked at Claire. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. Just disappointment. Because despite everything that happened, I still remembered the woman who sat beside me in that tiny apartment years ago. The woman who believed in me before the money. The woman who celebrated my first contract. The woman who used to tell me that we were a team. Somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing us as partners. She started seeing herself as someone waiting to collect a reward. And that was the tragedy. She didn't destroy our marriage because she wanted too much. She destroyed it because she forgot what we were supposed to protect. The judge finally placed the document down. Based on this agreement, certain assets being requested cannot be classified as marital property. Those words changed everything. Claire's expression froze. The house she thought represented victory suddenly felt less important. The accounts she believed proved she had won no longer carried the same meaning. Because the truth wasn't about what she received. It was about what she believed she had taken. She looked at me, and for the first time in months, she wasn't looking at me with anger. She was looking at me with confusion, as if she was silently asking the question she should have asked years earlier. Who are you really? The answer was simple. I was the same person I had always been. The difference was that she stopped looking closely enough to see me. The hearing continued, but the balance had already shifted. The woman who walked into that courtroom believing she controlled the ending had finally realized something. The divorce was never about who took more. It was about who understood what they were holding. And Claire had just discovered that the most valuable thing in front of her was the one thing she never bothered to understand. The hardest truth to accept is not that someone betrayed you. It's realizing they betrayed themselves because they were too focused on winning to understand what they were losing. After the judge finished reviewing the agreement, the courtroom felt different. Only a few minutes earlier, Claire had been sitting there like someone who had already reached the finish line. Now, she looked like someone standing in the middle of a road she no longer recognized. The confidence was gone. The certainty was gone. And for the first time since the divorce began, she wasn't thinking about what she would receive. She was trying to understand what she had missed. Because the document in front of her didn't just change the financial outcome. It changed the entire story she had been telling herself. For months, Claire believed she was the victim. She believed she was the person who sacrificed everything while I chased success. She believed she was the person who deserved compensation for the years she spent beside me. But the truth was more complicated. And complicated truths are often the ones people avoid. Yes, Claire supported me in the beginning. Yes, she stood beside me when my company was nothing. Yes, she made sacrifices. I never denied that. But somewhere along the way, she confused being part of the journey with owning the destination. She forgot that building something together doesn't mean every decision belongs to everyone forever. The agreement was never created to punish her. It was created to protect what we both helped build. That was the part she struggled to accept. Because in her mind, the document represented something personal. A lack of trust. A hidden plan. A sign that I expected our marriage to fail. But that wasn't true. The document existed because I understood something Claire didn't. Love can be real. Commitment can be real. And still, preparation matters. A promise doesn't become stronger because you ignore reality. It becomes stronger when both people respect it. After the hearing was temporarily paused, Claire walked toward me in the hallway. For a moment, she looked like the woman I married. Not the confident person from the courtroom. Not the person who arrived with a strategy and a victory speech prepared. Just Claire. The woman who once sat beside me in a small apartment and dreamed about the future. Did you know this would happen? She asked. Her voice was different. Not angry. Confused. I looked at her. Yes. She swallowed. So you knew I was going to lose? That question told me everything. Because even then, she still believed this was about winning and losing. About one person taking something from another. I shook my head. No, Claire. I knew you were going to misunderstand what you were asking for. She looked away. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. The hallway around us continued moving. Lawyers walking past. People talking quietly. Phones ringing. Life continuing while two people stood there realizing their marriage had ended long before the paperwork was signed. I thought you were going to fight me, she finally said. I know. Why didn't you? That was the question everyone had been asking. Why didn't Ethan Parker fight harder? Why didn't he argue? Why didn't he try to stop her from taking what she wanted? The answer was simple. Because sometimes fighting someone only gives them exactly what they want. Claire wanted proof that I was angry. She wanted a battle. She wanted to tell people that I was bitter because I lost. But I refused to become that person. The greatest revenge isn't watching someone suffer. The greatest revenge is becoming someone they can no longer control. I didn't need to fight, I told her. Why? Because the truth doesn't need to chase anyone. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. Was there anything else I didn't know? I didn't answer immediately. Because there was. There were more details. More layers. More things she had overlooked. But the biggest lesson wasn't about money. It wasn't about assets. It wasn't even about the agreement. It was about choices. Every decision we make creates a future version of ourselves. And Claire had spent years making decisions based on what she wanted in the moment. Recognition. Control. Security. She never imagined those same choices would eventually lead her here. Standing in a courthouse hallway. Looking at the consequences of her own signature. A few hours earlier, Claire walked into that building believing she was taking everything from me. Now she was beginning to understand something far more painful. She hadn't taken my future. She had only walked away from the future we could have built. And the person who signed that away was her. Sometimes the most expensive mistake a person can make is not losing money. It is losing the one opportunity they never realized they had. After the hearing ended, Claire didn't leave the courthouse immediately. She stood outside the courtroom doors, holding a copy of the agreement that had changed everything. A few hours earlier, that same hallway felt like the final step toward victory. Now it felt like the beginning of a question she couldn't answer. How did she miss it? How did she spend months preparing for a battle without understanding the battlefield? The truth was painful because it wasn't hidden from her. Nobody tricked her. Nobody forced her. The information was always there. She just never believed it mattered. And that was the part that stayed with her. Claire had spent so much time focusing on what she could take that she never stopped to understand what she was walking away from. Over the next few weeks, the reality of the divorce began to settle in. The house she thought represented her success became a reminder of everything that had changed. The rooms were quieter. The memories felt heavier. Every corner carried pieces of a life that no longer existed. The kitchen where we celebrated small victories. The backyard where we planned our future. The office where I spent countless nights building something we once called ours. Claire had received many of the things she asked for. But she discovered something unexpected. Having something and feeling like you won are not the same thing. Because victory is not measured by what you carry away. Sometimes it is measured by what you can no longer return to. Meanwhile, I went back to work. Not because I didn't care. Not because the marriage meant nothing. But because life continues even after something important ends. My company kept growing. New projects started. New opportunities appeared. But the biggest change wasn't financial. It was personal. For the first time in years, I wasn't waking up wondering how to fix something that both people had already stopped protecting. I wasn't trying to convince someone to see my value. I wasn't trying to prove that my sacrifices mattered. I simply focused on rebuilding myself. A few months after the divorce, I received a message from Claire. It was short. Only a few words. I think I understand now. I stared at the screen for a long time. Because there was a time when I wanted those words more than anything. I wanted her to see what I had sacrificed. I wanted her to remember the man behind the success. But by the time she finally understood, I had already accepted that some lessons arrived too late. We met for coffee a few days later. Not as husband and wife. Not as enemies. Just two people who shared 20 years of history. Claire looked different. Not physically. Something deeper had changed. The confidence she once carried so easily was gone. She looked like someone who had finally stopped running from the truth. I was so focused on proving I deserved more, she said quietly, that I never asked what I was actually losing. I didn't answer immediately, because she was right. But understanding something after the damage is done doesn't erase what happened. I never wanted you to lose, I told her. She looked surprised. Then why did you let me walk into this? I looked out the window, watching people move through their ordinary lives. People who had no idea about the years behind the conversation happening at that table. Because I couldn't force you to see something you didn't want to see. That was the hardest lesson. You cannot make someone value something they have already decided to measure differently. Claire measured our marriage by what she believed she deserved. I measured it by what we had built. And those two perspectives eventually led us to different endings. Before we left, she asked one final question. Do you hate me? I shook my head. No, she looked down. After everything? No, because hate would have meant I was still trapped in the past. And I wasn't. The divorce had taken many things from both of us, but it also revealed the truth. Claire lost the future she thought she was securing. I lost the person I thought would be beside me forever. Neither of us walked away with everything, but only one of us had spent years believing they already had. And sometimes the greatest loss is not what someone takes from you. It is what they unknowingly give up when they choose the wrong thing. The person who wins the final battle is not always the person who walks away with the most. Sometimes, the real winner is the one who finally understands what was worth protecting all along. A year after the divorce, I returned to the same courthouse where everything changed. Not because I had another legal battle. Not because I wanted to prove I was right. I came back because life has a strange way of bringing you full circle. The same hallway where Claire once walked with confidence was now just a hallway. The same courtroom where our marriage ended was now just another room. The walls were the same. The chairs were the same. But I was not the same person who sat there a year earlier. Back then, I was a man watching 20 years of memories turn into paperwork. A man trying to understand how someone I loved could look at our entire life together and see only numbers. But now, I understood something important. Not every ending is a failure. Some endings are simply the moment when you stop holding on to something that no longer exists. After the divorce, my life became quieter. Not easier. Quiet. There is a difference. I no longer woke up wondering what argument would happen next. I no longer questioned whether my efforts were appreciated. I no longer felt like I had to prove my worth to someone who had already decided what I was worth. I focused on my company. I focused on my employees. I focused on the things I could control. And slowly, I started rebuilding the part of myself I had lost while trying to save a marriage that both people had already stopped protecting. A few months later, my company opened a new headquarters. It was nothing like the first office above that old hardware store. It had glass walls, modern designs, hundreds of employees, a symbol of everything we had built. But whenever I walked through those doors, I still remembered where it started. The small office, the broken air conditioner, the nights when success felt impossible. Because the value of something is not created when people finally notice it. The value was there from the beginning. They just didn't see it. And that was the lesson I carried with me. People often chase what they can take. They fight for possessions. They fight for recognition. They fight to prove they were right. But sometimes, in that pursuit, they lose the very thing that made those possessions meaningful. Claire and I never spoke about the divorce again after that coffee meeting. Not because there was nothing left to say. Because sometimes closure doesn't come from one final conversation. Sometimes closure comes when you no longer need someone else to understand your pain. A few months later, I heard Claire had started over. She moved to another city, started a new job, built a different life. And honestly, I was happy for her. Because despite everything that happened, I never wanted her to fail. I wanted her to understand. There is a difference. Failure is watching someone fall. Understanding is watching someone finally grow. And maybe that was the final twist of our story. Claire thought the divorce would be the moment she finally gained control. But instead, it became the moment both of us had to face the truth. She learned that not everything valuable can be measured. And I learned that sometimes letting go is the only way to move forward. Years ago, Claire signed a document that changed her future. But the most important document she ever signed wasn't the legal agreement. It was every choice she made leading up to that moment. The way she treated love. The way she measured sacrifice. The way she decided what mattered. Because in the end, people don't lose their future because of one mistake. They lose it because of 1,000 small decisions they never thought would matter. I lost a marriage. I lost the future I imagined. But I found something I had forgotten. My own peace. And that was worth more than anything written on a piece of paper. Because the truth is simple. Someone can take your house. Someone can take your money. Someone can take the things you own. But they cannot take the person you become after you rebuild. And sometimes, the person who walks away believing they took everything from you is the person who gave you the freedom to finally become who you were meant to be.